Okay, so let's start with optional chaining. So this is basically a new addition to the language, recent addition to the language. Older browsers will need polyfill for that. We'll discuss about the polyfill at later point of time. It's basically, if there is something new addition to the language in JavaScript, and if you want to support that new addition in the older browsers as well, you need to write your own logic. You need to write your own logic, which is basically called polyfill in fancy terms, so that you can support that new feature. And older browsers should not have any problem, working with the new features, because as anyways they will be executing that old JavaScript code that they support. Okay, this is basically a brief idea on polyfills. It's like uh, writing a writing a compatible code for the older browsers for the newer features, so that older browsers also support that newer features with the help of normal JavaScript code that we write for implementing that new feature, which is going to run in the old browsers. Okay, this is basically a polyfill. Now, what is optional chaining? Optional chaining is basically a safe way so that you can access the nested properties of the object. Okay, even if an intermediate property does not exist. Now, what does that mean? Okay, now first of all, we'll get ahead with the non-existent property problem. Okay, so what is that non-existent property problem? Let user equals to, okay, and then we try to log the user. It says that fine, I'm empty object. Okay, now go ahead and try to type the address of it. Okay, it says that user.address is undefined because there is no property inside the user which corresponds to address. Okay, now if I try to access some more property here of city, it says cannot read properties of undefined. Okay, which means that city, which means that address itself is undefined. And then what you're trying to do, you're trying to do undefined dot city. So it says that undefined dot city it cannot read because inside undefined there is no property named city. That's the reason why it says cannot read the properties of undefined. This is undefined. And what it is trying to read, it is trying to read city, which is this. Okay. So let's go ahead and try to explore some other examples. Okay. One of that example is we can take a look at. Let's try to fetch. Let's try to store this particular tag in a variable. Okay. Let script HTML tag equals to document dot query selector. Okay, and now you want to if you want to store it, we can use this id. Okay, because ids are unique across all the tags. Okay, let's say if you have another script and if you pass in the same id, it will collapse. It cannot have the same, you cannot have the duplicate id. No tags in the html in the entire dom tree can have the same id. Okay, let's go ahead and paste it. Okay, now let's see what is there. Script. Okay, let's try to access the inner HTML of it. Oh, sorry, it's fine. I have to write a hash in front of that so that I can fetch it. Now when I do it, oh, script HTML tag. Now we can see the entire tag, which is here. Okay, the same thing is here as well. Script. Okay. Now I want to get the contents inside of it. The contents which are there inside of it. We can do that with the help of inner HTML. Okay. So what we can do, we can go ahead and do inner HTML. Now when we go script HTML tag, we can see all the things. Okay, we can see all the things that is there, props, page props, and all the things that you can see over here as well. Now we have stored that inside our variable. Okay, this is fine. Okay, we have we are actually finding a valid uh, valid HTML element in the DOM tree which is there, and we are then trying to access the inner HTML property of it. What if we do something different? What if we try to access some non-existent value? Okay, let's go ahead and try to do something like this. Okay, now this ID does not exist in real. Okay, now when we go ahead and press enter, what does it say? It again says the same thing that we were encountering here. Cannot read the properties of undefined reading city, cannot read the properties of null reading inner HTML. Since this particular since no element exists in the entire DOM tree which has an ID of this. Okay, previously we checked with this particular next data, it was there, so we were not getting any errors, it was not complaining, it was running fine. But now since we changed the ID to some non-existent ID, this particular thing returns null. Okay, and then what we're doing, we're doing that null dot inner HTML. So null dot inner HTML, null itself is null, so and it doesn't have a property of inner HTML, so that's the reason why this is complaining. Okay, so in normal programming tasks, in normal day-to-day tasks, it is very common that we get into this kind of problem, saying that when we are trying to access a particular element inside the DOM tree, there are high chances that it might not exist. Okay, and when we try to access the inner HTML of it, our program will throw errors like this. Okay, our program will throw errors like this in the console, which is not a very good thing, right? You don't want to show all these kind of error messages to user just because he did some programming mistakes. You can handle this gracefully. So there are a couple of ways to handle this gracefully. How can we handle this? We can use ternary operator. Okay, let's say. So we are saying that, hey, if this particular thing returns some valid HTML, then we can fetch. Then we can fetch the inner HTML of it. Okay, with the help of inner HTML. Are you writing inner HTML? Okay. And if it is not, if this thing and if this thing does, and if this thing returns null, okay, then we can say that inner HTML does not exist. Okay, now click on that script tag. What does it say? It says what we expected, saying that inner HTML does not exist because this thing returned null, so we landed into the false part. Okay, but there is a problem with this. The problem with this that there is a the code is repeated. If you see document.query selector is repeated 2 times. Okay, it is not very good way. Okay, let's go back. Go ahead. Let's go back to our example. Okay, let's go back to our example and try to do the same thing with the objects. If you want to handle this error gracefully, what you can do? If the city exists, then you say user.address.city. Otherwise, you say city is not there. So we're saying that if user.address is not undefined, which means address is there, then go ahead and try to access the city. Okay. Otherwise, you say that city is not there. Okay. Because so yeah, this is one of the things. But again, the same problem is there like we saw earlier. User.address repeated 2 times. User.address. It's not a very good way, right? What else we can do for this? So yeah, what if we want to? So right now you can see that user address is there 2 times. Okay. What if the property is more nested? Okay. It's like if user.address right now what I want to do, I want to access the name of the city. Okay, name of the city. I mean, city can contain it, but I just want to access like city is basically city is not just the like it's something like this. Okay, Let me show you. Address, and then inside that we have a city as an object, and then we have the name of it. Okay, and then we have some other details. Okay, the city is not a primitive, not something like city and then Uttar Pradesh. City is not a primitive. City is an object. Okay, and I want to keep the name of that inside the city. Okay, so I want to. So right now, just the user exists. Okay, just the user exists, and I want to see if the user has an address in that, and if the user has a city in that, and if the user and if the city has the city name in that. How can we do that? We can go something like if user dot address ampersand user dot uh, address dot city, and then finally user dot address dot city dot name. Then you print this particular thing, user dot address dot city dot name. Okay, that is the case. So since this particular thing evaluates to undefined, all these things does not work. Okay, but if you see user dot address is repeated one time, two time, three times we had to repeat, and this particular thing user dot address dot city, it's repeated two times. Okay, so it's completely awful. Okay, now let's check if things are working fine in our code. Address city name. See, now we can get the output because user.address exists, user.address.city exists, and user.address.city.name exists. So this thing evaluated to true, and then we got our answer. Okay, so this is like a very long story. Like this is a very long thing, and it's very awful, and lots of repeatability are there, and chances of making errors are also there. So what we can do to fix this? Okay, yeah, so we just saw that how awful the syntax is, ugly the syntax is, because there is a lot of repeatability in the code, and that doesn't makes a lot of sense just because of the repeatability. How we can first, work it out? We can do. Let me start the server so that we can get the live output of that. Okay. Now we can go ahead and do some optional chaining. Now let's go ahead and I'll just show you that how optional chaining works, and then I can go ahead and talk about what are the nitty and gritty details of it. Okay. User address dot city name. Just that. We can convert this entire line into this particular single line, and it will work exactly the same way that it was working here. So if I show you address city, fine, you see both of the things outputs the same thing, except that this is very smaller and this is very longer, ugly, awful, and lots of repeatability are there. Okay, in this particular syntax. Now how this works, let's first of all try to read it. It reads something as if user is undefined or null. Sorry, let's go ahead and try to read uh, the uh, the forward way. If user is not undefined or null, then you try to access the property of address. If address is not undefined or null, then you try to access the property of the address, which is city. If city is not undefined or null, then you try to access the property of the city, which is name, and then you finally print it. Okay. So how does this work? How optional chaining works? This particular thing. If the value before it, which is user, if it is not undefined, if it is undefined or null, if the user is undefined or null, then it is going then do not evaluate anything which comes after it. Just simply return undefined. Okay, so if I remove this line, now what is going to happen? User is defined. It is fine. User is an object. User is not something like it is undefined or null. Okay, it is a valid object. It is a legal object. Okay, now when we go ahead and do some dot address. Okay, now address is undefined. You see, address is undefined. But if we go ahead with the if we go ahead with the user, user is an object. Okay, but address is simply undefined. Okay, so we have applied an optional chaining over here. Now optional chaining is going to do something like, if address is undefined or null, then it is not going to evaluate anything which comes after it, and it is simply going to return undefined right at this moment only, which is this. Okay, now there are some caveats to using, like to overusing optional chaining. Let's say we let's say that at all the times users should exist in the program. Okay, but at some point of time, let's say because it can because overusing of optional chaining can basically suppress the errors. Now how it can suppress the errors, I'll just show you on that. So like I said, we made sure that we have a uh, condition that all the times in our program, user should always exist. I don't care about the properties that are inside it. I don't care about the address, city, and name one, and all the rest of the properties that user can have. I just want that user should always be an object and it should always exist in the program. It should never be undefined or null. But let's say at some point of time, uh, you know, an intern came and it just says user equals to null. Okay. Now you see, user is null. User itself is null, and we are getting undefined. If I remove this, it is going to complain me. Cannot read the properties of null reading address. So it is trying to read something like undefined or null dot address. Null dot address is not true because null doesn't contain any properties in itself. So address is also not there. But if we apply optional chaining here, it is going to suppress the error. It is going to give us undefined. And we had a you know uh, condition in the beginning saying that user should exist at all the times in our program, and it should never be undefined or null. But since someone came and just did something like this, and we were using optional chaining, we were overusing optional chaining, we did not get any errors. We got undefined and the error was suppressed. But if we remove this, then we start going to get the errors. We don't have any problem saying that user is null, so I cannot read the properties of null. And I'm trying to read a property of null, which is address. Address is not there in the null. Okay. So this is how the optional chaining overuse of optional chaining can suppress the errors. Okay. So we should not overuse it. Next step, we are going to see. Um, we're going to see something like short circuiting. Okay, recording is happening. Okay, it's happening. Short circuiting. Now, what are we going to do with the short circuiting? So basically, as I've said before, uh, the optional chaining syntax construct immediately stops the evaluation if the left part does not exist, which means this will stop the execution if address is undefined. Okay, the same rule that I just said before. Okay, anything before it is undefined, the evaluation will stop then and there, and undefined will be returned in place of that. Okay, so let user equals to null, user one equals to null. Okay, and then let x equals to 0, 20, let's say. Okay, and now we do something like say hi x plus plus. Now what we are intending to do here, we are asking that, hey, execute say hi function, and I'm passing x in that, and I'm going to get a return value apart from 20. The x should be replaced with 21. Okay, but since say hi function is not there inside the user one, since user one itself is null, then the evaluation will never reach at this point of time, at this particular line, at this particular phase, because user one is itself null, and as I mentioned before, anything before it is undefined or null, then it is going to return as undefined. Okay, so the execution never reaches here, so x is never implemented. So this was it about short circuiting. There are a couple of variations on optional chaining, which is this one, like we just saw, and this one. Okay, this one is for objects when we are trying to access a property of it, or it also applies to arrays, because array is also an object, right, in JavaScript. And this is for obviously functions. Now let's try ahead and go ahead and try to do some examples. Admin user equals to admin, or we can do something like function. Okay, and then saying that I'm admin. Okay, let user guest, we have another object user guest. Okay, now let's try to console log with the help of optional chaining. Let's try to execute the function named admin. Okay, in both of the objects. Okay, and see what is the behavior. So user admin user, and then dot admin. Okay, because admin is a property here. Okay, and then try to execute it. We have an error here. Please comment this out, and then we will see. So it says that I am undefined. What does it say here? Okay, wait. Oh, I'm trying to. What is the case? Why it's not executing? Admin user dot admin, and then you have this. I think it's executing. Oh, it's executing. Yeah. Okay. Because the output is actually showing over here. So if I comment this, the output will go. If I uncomment this, output will come back. Okay. And then let's try to do the same thing with the user guest. Okay. User guest dot admin, and then try to execute the function. See, nothing happens. We don't get anything here because there is nothing such as property admin inside the inside the inside the user guest. There is no property named admin inside the user guest. So what we do, user guest dot admin. Since this thing returns as undefined, the execution never reaches here. So the function doesn't get executed. And in this case, the function gets executed because admin returns a function, and then finally we execute that function. Okay, if that is the function. Okay, so yeah, this is also one of the thing. Now let's try to do something else and try out this particular variation. Okay, so how do we go about it? How do we go about it? Let's try to add something here. Admin name. So on. Okay, and then admin user, which is this, and then try to access our key, admin name, passed inside this. Okay. So if admin name exists inside the admin user, then we are going to safely access it. Okay. Then we are going to safely access it, because admin user again is not undefined, it is a valid object. And then we're trying to access a property inside it, which is admin name. Let's say admin name, we change it here to 11. So it is going to give us undefined. It is not going to throw us any errors. Okay. But if we have